Those who hate their lives seldom love their deaths.
Heed the groaning of a close friend. Welcome to the Two Retired Homeschoolers. I'm Holly Matthews, and my life lesson is that if I ever am in the situation where I become a dragon, I need to make sure I play with my victims a bit before I eat them.
My name is Rebecca, and being brave is not worth it. You will be cut down in the prime of life. Cowards live long.
The Two Princesses of Bamarre by Gail, Carson, Levine is a book for kids ages 8 to 12 about two princesses who live in a land called Bamarre. Bamarre is a dangerous place full of evil ogres, dragons, specters, griffins, and the plague. The plague is called the Great Death, and no one ever survives it. The brave princess, Meryl, decides she's going to go fight monsters and find the cure, which is pretty dumb of her since the prophecy literally says the cure will be found when cowards find courage and rain falls over all Bamarre. Lucky for everyone, Meryl falls ill of the Great Death, and her cowardly sister, Addie, has to buck up and find the cure before she dies, with plenty of crying and long detours around spiders along the way. With the help of her 7 league boots, the friendly neighborhood sorcerer Rise, and a dragon who really wouldn't be so bad if she didn't go around eating everybody, perhaps she can find Mount Zeriat, the land of the fairies, whom some legends say know the cure. Alright, first impressions. So, this was my first time reading it.
And far for the course, I've read it.
Um, and I really liked it a lot. I like the fact that I read it as an adult for the first time.
Why?
Because I feel like whenever I love it when you read stuff as a kid and then you go back and read it and you're like, but the thing is, it's still influenced by the first time you read it. And so you're like, wow, I never saw this. Or wow, that was a lot dumber than I thought it was when I first read it. But you're still influenced by your initial first impression.
Yeah, I really like this book.
Oh, also, I just want to throw in the observation that for once, the name of a kingdom does not start with A. Granted, B is just a step down, but like, you know how every kingdom is like Avalon, Arulin, Asgard. Like every kingdom, it starts with A. Anyway.
I will say it doesn't end in an A, which I feel like is more of a thing. Like it seems like fantasy, if you can't think of a good fantasy name, it's gonna be like blah 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 yeah.
All right, simple plots versus complicated ones, and also the writing style.
Yes. So the plot of this book is, I don't know if simple is the right word, but it's very straightforward. There's no like crazy twists or like, actually, it turns out all along this character was bad and was planning to do this. And
Mm-hmm.
it's not like a twisty story. It's just there's two sisters, one of them falls ill and is gonna die, and the other has to like find some courage and go save her sister's life. It's just a quest. It's a very simple quest story.
Yeah.
And I don't know, like there's something really cool about a complicated plot that like snaps together at the end and your mind is kind of blown by how complicated and it was and how it all makes sense. But I feel like people always try to do that type of plot and they're not always good at it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really appreciate when someone just writes a simple story because actually simple plots are can be really good stories too. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Or maybe it even doesn't have so much to do with the fact that it's a simple plot, but that it made promises and fulfilled them. Like, I heard this said about plots a lot, and the key to writing a good book, as far as the plot, is like you make initial promises and you keep those promises at the end of the book, as in, like, these are the expectations you can have going into this, and then you meet those expectations. And some books make the mistake of making promises they don't keep, and other books don't make promises, so you're kind of bored until you get to the end where it's like, oh, here's all these things you didn't know you were getting. And this book was very good at laying down the expectations, which it later came back around and fulfilled.
Yeah, no, I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah,
But I also do just think that a plot does not have to be complicated and mysterious to be interesting.
I agree. But even with this plot, as simple as it was, it wasn't predictable. I mean, the little plot points that like when you were coming up to them, like for instance, this one character was talking to the main character, and she was in a situation where there are these things called specters, which impersonate real people and look like them. Like I knew she was talking to a specter when she thought she was talking to the other character. Like little moments like that happen all throughout the book where I knew what was happening when the main character didn't. But at the same time, for like the main plot points, I had no idea what was going to happen.
It's a very fairy tale feeling book with a
Mhm.
little bit of myth feeling in there too.
Mhm.
And I think that kind of ties in because it follows all these like tropes and all these like common fairy tale elements, but then it also like some of them it follows straight and some of them it twists on their head or takes them in an unexpected direction. It both
Like
celebrates the elements
yeah,
and subverts them.
yeah.
Like I like that combination.
Yeah. And I liked how at the end like something that wasn't super predictable was, you kind of thought Merle was going to be cured the
Mm-hmm.
way through the book. And technically she wasn't cured although she didn't die, but at the same time she was going to be separated from Addie, so it was just kind of like that was one of the things I like specifically about kids books because I feel like kids books are better about having fulfilling endings and they kind of ignore the side of life that is harsher,
Mm-hmm.
and this book definitely did not do that.
No, it was a very bittersweet ending.
Yeah.
But it was not like bittersweet, more bitter. It was more sweet than bitter, or at least, I don't know. I don't like bittersweet endings where it's like, well, at least no one died. No, there was actual good stuff about the ending,
Yeah.
besides the sad stuff.
Yeah. Okay, so the writing style. Another thing I wanted to talk about really quick is how cool it is that when you like minimize the amount of details in your writing style, it almost like, well, A, it's if you do it right, it keeps your brain more engaged. And B, it's like your brain will like fill those empty spaces with things you're like familiar with. So I remember in this part where she's walking through the forest with all the specters in it, she didn't really describe the forest very much. I remember her like saying there were some thorns and some flowers, and it was very dark. But my brain pulled this scene from The Hobbit, and I didn't even realize that I had done this until like after I read the book. But
You were like picturing
I
Mirkwood.
envisioned it all in, yeah, that forest in my brain. And I've done the same thing like with scenes with Narnia. I've like inserted like the environment that I imagined that originally came from reading the Chronicles of Narnia into something else.
And you just have to have that one or two key details to like spark your brain into doing that.
Yeah. Or, and this happens in real life a lot too. Like my friends will be telling me about something that happened at their house, and I imagine that thing occurring in my house just with them there. I don't know. I just think it's interesting how our brains do that and how it's like, yeah, it's not even that necessary to like go into all the details if you don't want to. And this is a very original opinion to have, but kids do tend to be a bit more creative. And maybe that's because that's the stage where they're originally coming up with all those like environments and like visual images in their brains for the first time. So it's especially appropriate not to include as much detail in a kid's book. Well, that and because kids like rather get bored if you have too much detail.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's why adults rather like a lot more details than kids, is because adults are like a little more lazy and filling in those blanks, or stuff isn't as vivid to them if they can't like see it in their mind's eye as well. And do you want to talk really quick about like just surprising elements within the book? Because for me, I was there were some parts I was like, wow, I can't believe this is a kid's book. Like all the language was very simple and would be easy to understand as an 8 to 12-year-old. But then every once in a while she would throw in a really long word, like a word I would have to look up. I thought that was interesting and kind of like good of her to do because that's how you get kids to like learn words. Another some surprising things in this book was how scenes were rather explicit. Like I remember this griffin like landed on Addie and started like eating her, like biting a hole in her cheek, and I was like, oh, no. There's another time she like shoved her finger into the eye of an ogre, and it kind of described it a little bit, and it was like, oh. So there were little shocking parts where it was like, well, this was rather gruesome. Like another part where it was describing this fight scene and someone's finger just got like bitten off randomly.
Are we talking about Lord of the Rings or the Two Princesses of Bamarre?
Exactly, exactly. And even some of the romance, I was like, wow, like it was nothing bad, but it was just like I had never read a kid's book that would like say something like this.
Like an example?
Oh, like the part where Rise like sweeps Addie up into his arms and kisses her left eyelid before actually kissing her. I had to commit, and part of me was like, don't say it out loud, and I was like, oh, I got to. Let's talk about the relationship between Addie and Rise. Romance is a surprisingly hard thing to write, like to do it genuinely well,
It's a thing that you don't just like display to the public.
which is why when we see it in like entertainment, which is meant
It's
to be
like
displayed, it's a little almost,
weird.
yeah. So that's why I think it's so hard to write or in movies romance because it's just odd in general. But I think the book like did a weirdly good job about it. It was so simple about it. It's like it wasn't even trying,
Mm,
and that's what made it so good in a way.
mm.
It's not that she didn't try in like an appropriate way that you should with trying to write something that's truly good.
She didn't make it overwrought though. She wasn't like trying to make it the romance of the century.
Yeah.
Is that what you mean?
Yeah. And also, like, again, just with the simplicity of it, like, they didn't have a very complicated relationship.
Yeah, no, there were no like twists and turns or misunderstandings or anything dramatic.
Yeah,
It was quite simply two people like each other and it's a thread in the story.
right. Which I really appreciated. All right, fairy tale and myth elements.
Oh, yes. I like the inclusion of like 7 league boots and the magic tablecloth
Oh, yeah,
and
for
like
sure.
defeating a dragon by trickery. The specters and dragons are more like, okay, so I find the specters just so creepy.
Mm-hmm.
Like they kind of give me shivers. Like the scene where Addie and Meryl are out in the woods and the little boy comes to
Mm-hmm.
take Addie to find Meryl and and her cowardice actually saves her because she doesn't want to go deeper into the woods. Um, but like it was so creepy when like Meryl started throwing stones at him, and I was so confused too. I was like, "Wait, what's going on?" People are shot. What is Meryl a specter? It's not the real Meryl. And then it turned out no, the boy was the specter, and he was just like posing as this completely cute boy to lure Addie to her death. And then as soon as they figured out that he was a specter, he just like starts like cackling, like he just laughs, like he thinks it's the funniest thing ever, and he almost got away with it. And oh boy, just creepy. And I love the fact that like they're just pure evil, the specters. Um, and they're just like a very kind of creepy evil and they can take on the face of anyone, which just is very I don't know, that's just a thing I really like. But I also like the fact that like if you catch them and command them to stay, they have to give you a prophecy and the prophecy has to be true.
Yeah.
I just think it's a really fun world building element. And as for the dragons, there's a dragon in this book that's like a very important character. And Addie is kidnapped by the dragon for a while. She has to figure out how to like defeat her. She has to find out from the dragon how to find the cure for the Grey Death, but also how to like escape before her sister dies while Addie's still there in captivity. Because the dragon hasn't killed her yet. Because the dragon likes she's very lonely.
Mm-hmm.
She's like a really interesting character because she's quite complex, even though she's technically bad.
Yeah.
And so whenever she catches humans, she keeps them for a while until she gets sick of them and then she kills them and eats them. But um
And we have to explain this really quick. It's really disgusting, actually, although very creative and intriguing.
it's
That,
kind of psychologically very cruel.
yeah.
But I don't think the dragon thinks of it that way.
I think she thinks of it as like, here's your
Sure.
chance to make your life as long as possible.
Yeah.
And it's also very beneficial to me. Her name, okay, the dragon's name is Volleys, which is such an interesting name for a dragon. I quite like it. And basically, so she has her den full of stuff, as all dragons do. And she's basically like, whenever Addie does anything that pleases her, and this went for all the humans before Addie that were caught by her, whenever she did anything to please her, she got to take one of the items in her pile of gold and treasures and put it in this little cabinet. And every time she did something the dragon didn't like, she'd take out an item and put it back on her pile. And as soon as all the items were out of her cabinet, that would be the moment that she would die.
Yep. Oh man.
Yes, which is a great place to insert my favorite quote. Basically, Addie's trying to entertain the dragon by telling her about like her home and like
Yeah. The father in this one is like he always quotes from the Book of Homely Truths.
I love him so much.
Which is like Bamir's version of the Oxford Book of Aphorisms. And he just finds whatever like little pithy quotation best supports whatever he wants to do.
And let me see. I told her about the Book of Homely Truths. I quoted the saying I'd included in my note, and a few others. She loved the sayings. Her bells rang on when I said, and her bells are just like the sound of her voice, which I thought was creative of the author. Her bells rang on when I said, poverty means more to the poor than to the rich. Wealth means more to the rich than to the poor. So I guess her bells would be laughter. So, anyway, in gratitude, she made me take another gift for my hoard. When I ran out of homilies, she began to invent her own. What about this? The impetuous man is overtaken by his desires. It would be a fine homely truth, no? Very fine, I said. She laughed delightedly. Food for the thought requires a mind with teeth. What I adore about the best of them is that they almost mean something. She laughed for a minute longer.
I don't know, she's just very interesting, very intelligent, very lonely, very selfish, and
Well, and the most interesting thing apart about her is she's cruel, but she doesn't genuinely care about the people, but it's like she's lived so long having everything she wants and having the power to do anything that it's like she's reached this point where it's like,
she's bored.
why wouldn't I just let this human get a drink of water or give them better clothes or whatever? Like it doesn't feel like it's taking away from her to give them what they want. And it's almost like she does care about them in a small little way. Like she enjoys the feeling of caring, even if she doesn't really actually care.
Yeah.
Which is almost so much more sadistic and terrible.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's just like that's another part of this dynamic is all their encounters are like pretty innocent and just like rather nice to read, you know, like nice little conversations that they have, even though it's so terrible.
And she always says that she mourns the people once she's killed them. Yeah, but like again, such a cool world building, and she has a sense of humor, which I really enjoy. So one of my favorite myth elements, to get back on track, is with the ending with the fairies. Like they are such a cool race. I don't know how to explain how cool they are, but like the fact that they cannot die or be hurt. They're fighting like huge monsters way down in the ocean and way up in the sky, and they can't be hurt and they can't be killed. So even if they lose, you would think there's like zero stakes for them. But actually, there's not, because when they fail, if they lose the battle, then there's consequences on Earth. So, like the elves and the dwarves and the humans have to deal with all this stuff.
Yeah.
And the elves and dwarves and humans are vulnerable and they can be hurt and killed.
Like you don't have to do this thing, but you're doing it
Yeah.
for good of.
Yeah, it's like super high stakes, but also super low stakes.
For you
simply
personally.
because yeah. But that almost makes it higher stakes.
Right.
I really like that part.
Okay, Addie's character growth. I think it is very interesting that Addie, who is a coward, like acknowledges consistently that she's a coward. She's not a coward about admitting she's a coward.
Yeah. I'll do my favorite quote.
Okay.
Which describes Addie.
Yes.
She says this like right at the beginning of the book. I was no hero. The dearest wishes of my heart were for safety and tranquility. The world was a perilous place, wrong for the likes of me. I feel like she's a character it would have been very easy to make either boring or unlikable. And she's actually neither. And by the way, one of the things she does is embroider.
Yeah.
Which I think is so fun. I've never seen an embroidering heroine before where that's like one of the main things she does and it's actually part of the plot. And I used to like to embroider when I was a kid. So
yeah, because embroidery and knitting and all that kind of stuff is usually seen as like, oh,
lame and old lady-ish. Versus Meryl.
I finally saw the difference between Meryl and me, truer than the difference between cowardly and brave. She wanted to battle monsters for the adventure of it. I wanted to defeat them for the peace that would follow. Do you feel like Meryl's a little unrealistic?
Meryl is seen through Addie's viewpoint, and so from Addie's point of view, she's like kind of incomprehensibly
brave
and adventurous. So yeah, she feels weird. But like like Addie cannot possibly understand that you would want to just like have an adventure for the sake of having an adventure. So that whole element of Meryl's personality is this like
Mm.
matter of wonder and confusion for Addie. So I feel like the way Meryl comes across in the book is more a result of how Addie sees her.
Yeah, it seemed like Meryl didn't have much of a personality outside of the fact that she wants to slay dragons and fight griffins and battle ogres and
Yeah, that's fair.
whereas Addie her personality was, "Oh, I'm so afraid of spiders." But yeah, I just like bravery and courage and cowardice. That's always like been a kind of confusing topic to me because they say courage isn't the lack of fear, it's feeling fear and choosing to like overcome it, which in if we're going by that definition, Meryl wasn't technically courageous because
Yeah,
she
she
just didn't
was.
feel fear.
No, she did feel fear. She just other things were more important to her. Don't you remember at the end when they were fighting and well after they had been fighting,
Hmm.
she asked no, she said to Addie that she was very grateful for that adventure because otherwise she might never have found out that she actually did have courage. She'd wondered to herself if she was secretly relieved that Addie had made her promise not to start on her adventures until she was
Yeah.
wed, because she was secretly scared. It might have been all talk.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And like you were saying earlier with the perception of Meryl coming through Addie's eyes for the rest of the book, I
Right.
can see why I would draw that conclusion about her not feeling fear, because Addie was like, if you have this level of courage, you just don't experience fear.
She does come across that way for much of the book.
Hmm.
Did you think Addie's character growth from actually cowardly, she was actually a coward. It wasn't like she'd always thought she was a coward and then she found out she had courage. No, no, no. She was a coward. She had enough of incentive, her sister almost dying, to go out and do something. She even delayed for a while. But once she had that incentive, I mean, she did actually go and actually become more courageous. And did you think that was convincingly written?
Yes, especially like and this is another thing I really admired about this book being a children's book. I don't feel like, or maybe these are an all kids books, but they're just so subtle when you read them as a kid, you don't like see them as an adult would. But like, there's definitely life lessons written throughout the book when Addie is like learning different ways to cope with her fear or different mentalities, or she'll be thinking something and she'll be like, I need to stop thinking about this now, or I can't think about it this way. Have you heard the quote, fear is false evidence appearing real? Basically, it's just saying that fear is like a thing in our heads. It's not real because it's making you perceive the world through a lens in which everything is much worse than it actually is or whatever. Or it's just like taking actual facts and twisting them for
That's like
whatever.
I think it's a Shakespeare line, fear is more pain than is the pain it fears.
Hmm.
Like it makes everything worse. But also, sometimes fear is simply a reaction to the world.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, like, yeah, there's like actual animal fear where it's like, I'm not gonna walk off this cliff because I'll die. That fear isn't false evidence appearing real,
right.
but it's all the fear but that.
That's true.
Okay, do you agree that fear is like basically the worst vice that exists?
No, I think fear is bad. Okay. There's a C.S. Lewis quote about how courage is the form taken by all the other virtues at the testing point.
Mm,
And so I think that's the thing is like fear isn't bad. It's when because of fear you do other bad things.
yeah.
It's kind of the opposite of courage. Like if you don't have courage, you don't have any virtue because you won't stick to any virtue when it's hard because that requires courage. And if you give in to fear, you won't have any virtue because the fear stops you. And I also don't even think that fear is like the thing that's held people back or I don't even think fear is like the worst thing in the world.
I don't think it's a sin necessarily to have fear, and that's why you're saying that. But at the same time, if I could do away with any negative, like emotion, feeling, vice, whatever you want to call it would definitely be fear.
Yeah, which is understandable because fear comes into play and stops you from doing a lot of things.
Because, like, the Bible says that perfect love casts out all fear. And that to me kind of makes almost fear the opposite of love. But, okay, if we're taking Satan as the ultimate source of evil, which I don't know if that's true. Evil might just be a concept that exists outside of Satan. In fact, I do think that's true. But I do think it's also true that Satan is the main, uh,
He's
like
the
he
dark.
promotes it the most. I do think it's interesting that like it seems that Satan operates most or retains most of his control over humanity through fear. And that would alone kind of make it the worst thing.
Again, I think you're just kind of like not thinking about all the horrible stuff that happens in the name of greed, all the stuff that happens in the name of love of power, all the stuff that happens in the name of selfishness, pride, hatred. Fear is simply the thing that gives potency to the other vices, just like
Right.
courage is the thing that gives potency to the other virtues. So fear is just kind of like the like it's involved in everything, but it's not the original cause of everything. So I hesitate to assign to it the most blame.
Hmm. This has been interesting. I never made that observation about fear kind of being the channel through which all the other vices flow, or just being a little helpmate for them.
Yeah, I literally just thought of it as we were talking.
Yeah. You know, the thing I love about you is you disagree with me about some of the stuff I've thought about the most in life. And I guess maybe I just think about these very particular things more than other people, so other people aren't really prepared to have all these counter arguments against them. Or maybe there's things that are just like very generally accepted, and therefore people never really tend to disagree with me. But you always challenge me on these things that I've always taken as very basic facts. Thank you for listening to the sixth episode of The Two Retired Homeschoolers.
That's right, folks. See you next time. And before we leave, a message from Emily. Goodbye. You said, which isn't it interesting that blah blah blah, and I said yeah, and you said which is interesting. Yeah. Oh, that was another thing. My friend thought it was super predictable and tropey that of course she would have the cliche fear of being afraid of spiders. And but spiders are creepy looking sometimes, so it makes sense that if you're afraid of your own shadow, you're afraid of spiders.
Did I tell you about the spider that lived in my room?
I don't think so.
His name was Michael. He was a furry little jumping spider, and I saw him on about like 7 to 10 different occasions, and he just lived in my curtain. And sometimes I would like bring him on my bed and play with him a little bit and put him back in the curtain. But one day, or 1 month, I should say, I never saw him, and then I just never saw him after that. So
That's a tragic story.